Got it.
Can you see the screen now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, so we are in Parshat Bechukotai, and with that, we will be concluding Sefer Vayikra this Shabbos. So the focus of Bechukotai really is not what we're going to be looking at today. The focus really is the Tochacha, the series of curses that that dominate most of the Parsha. But we're going to look today at the very beginning, and this is I've mentioned before, Rabbi Yitzchak Et Shalom, who I listened to a lot of his shiurim online, and this is totally straight from his mouth. I mean, I hope I do it justice, but the idea is to give it straight from his mouth. And we're going to focus on the very beginning of the parsha. So before we get into the curses of Bechukotai, there's an introduction which tells us about, well, you know, what happens if things go well, if we do what we're supposed to do. And it would be nice to put more emphasis on that piece of it, but he really I think put this together in a remarkable way. So let's begin by just looking at the introduction, the beginning of the parsha. Im bechukotai telechu, vet mitzvotai tishmeru v'asitem otam. If you follow my laws and faithfully observe my commandments, then atati gishmechem v'itam, nasnaha aretz yivula v'et hasadeh yitain kiryo. I'll give rain in its proper time. The land will give its produce, and the trees will yield fruit. Hisig lachem dayish et batzir, vatzir yatzir et zara, v'chaltem lachmachem lasova, v'shaftem lavetach ba'artzachem. Your threshing shall overtake the vintage. Your vintage shall overtake the sowing. Meaning, you'll be constantly harvesting the products. Right? You won't have any downtime. There'll be so much abundance. And you'll eat your bread and satiate. You'll dwell securely in your land. V'natati shalom ba'aretz u'shchavtem ve'in macharid, and I'll give peace in the land. You'll dwell, and there won't be anyone to bother you. V'ishpati chayara amin aretz, there won't be any wild animals. V'cherev lo tavor b'artzachem, there won't be any sword passing through. Right, there won't be any war. And you'll chase after your enemies, and they'll fall before you by your sword. And 5 of you will chase 100, and the 100 will chase thousands, and they'll fall before you. I'll turn towards you, and I will cause you to be fruitful, to multiply, and you'll be abundant, and I will fulfill my promise, my covenant with you. And you'll have old stuff and new stuff. Everything will be perfect. It'll be great. I will place my sanctuary among you, and I will not abhor you. And I will walk in your midst, and I will be for you a God, and you will be for me my nation. I am the Lord your God, who took you out of Egypt from being slaves to them, and I broke off the yoke of your burden, and I caused you to walk erect, to walk straight, to walk erect, to walk proud. Okay, so this is a really nice description of what could be, right? If things go well, then everything's going to be perfect, right? So he picks up and he notes that there's an interesting use of one verb in this section. It's bolded in the Hebrew. The English bolding didn't make it into the final. I don't know what happened with the format, but the verb halach, lalechet, which we normally translate as, what does lalechet mean, or halach?
To lead. Yeah.
To walk, to go. Okay, so it's a little bit, right? So clearly it's not being used in a literal sense of walking in my laws, but to follow them, right? It all makes sense to us. But I think that this might be, in fact, if not the source, one of the first sources and one of the primary sources. We think about, what do we call Jewish law?
Halacha.
Halacha, right? Again, it's that same verb, halach. right? So yeah, we understand that the law is to go, to follow, to do it, but it's an interesting choice for why the legal system is called halacha specifically. And so we're going to spend a little bit of time developing this thought, this idea of lalechet, to go, and how that might work into the parsha and more Jewish life in more broad strokes. So just to sort of point out the difficulty, or what the question is, Rashi on this pasuk, in the first pasuk, im bechukotai telechu, if you will follow in my laws. Yachol zeh kiyum mitzvot. You might think that this means to fulfill the mitzvot. No, because the very next phrase is more directly addressing keeping mitzvot, right? Mitzvotai tishmaru, you'll keep my laws and do them. So that is fulfilling of the mitzvot. Mani mekayem im bechukotai telechu. So what does this phrase im bechukotai telechu mean? Shetiyu amelim batorah. That you should be, you should toil, you should work laborious in Torah, right? Amelus in Torah. It's not something that comes easy, but you have to really break your teeth. Something that you have to work hard in order to achieve. Very famous, very often quoted Rashi. But he's telling us that we can't translate this phrase literally, that there's something else going on here. So he takes it to mean amelus in Torah, to be diligent and persevering in our Torah study. The real place we want to get to is a few psukim, is a few sources later. But just to lay it out, this is not the first time that we encounter that. And again, I don't think this is anything earth-shattering at this point. But the first time that we encounter a non-literal use of halach, of to go, is way back in Sefer Breshit, chapter 5. Does anyone remember the character of Chanoch?
Sure.
Of what?
Chanoch.
Oh.
Vayechi Chanoch 560 shana vayoled et Metushalach. So Chanoch lives for 560 years, and he fathers Metushalach. Vayithalech Chanoch et Elokim acharei holido et Metushalach 300 shana vayoled banim uvanot. Chanoch goes after God after he fathers Metushalach for 300 more years, and he has other sons and daughters. He lives for 860 years. Et Elokim ve'inenu ki lakach oto Elokim. He walked after the way of God, and then he was no more, for God took him. So Chanoch has this interesting description of he is mithalech et Elokim. He walks with God. He walks in God's path. Unclear exactly what it means, and then this very enigmatic thing at the end of his life where he all of a sudden is no more. Right? Lots of the commentaries have a great fun trying to understand what exactly that means. But clearly he had some sort of spiritual relationship, some sort of spiritual connection with God, and that's seen by our verb vayitalech. He walked.
But it's a hitpael.
It's a hitpael, which is the reflexive form of the verb. So, right, what does it mean to walk oneself, to go oneself? It's a hard word to translate.
Mm-hmm.
And then we find it again, probably more familiar to us, with Noah. So we know the debate of Noah, right? Was he really an absolutely righteous person, or was he only righteous relative to everyone else in his time? Eila toldot Noach, Noach ish tzadik, tamim haya b'dorotav. These are the line of Noah. Noah was a righteous man in his generation. So that's the question. Was it only in his generation he was righteous, but he would not have been righteous in other generations? Or was he in his generation and all the more so in other generations? Then Eta Elokim hitalech Noach. Noach walked with God. And again, as Anne would point out, in the hitpael, in the reflexive form, Noach also walks with God or follows in God's ways. The next source we'll go to is number 8 and that is in Sefer Shmot when we get the man, right? The first time that they complain for food. Actually, this right. So Vayomer Hashem al Moshe, Nini mamtir lachem lechem min hashamayim. God tells Moshe, I'm going to cause bread to fall down from the sky, to rain out of the sky. Vayetzah ha'am v'laktu dvar yom b'yomo, and the nation will go out and gather it every day. L'ma'an anasenu, in order that I can test them. Hayelech b'torati im lo. They will follow in my Torah, in my instructions, or not. So there's some ambiguity about what this means also. It doesn't mean Hayelech b'torati, if they will follow in my Torah. It could be specific to the man, right? There were instructions given in the gathering of the man, right? You can't collect it on Shabbos. You can only collect enough for whoever's in your house. You can't leave any over for the next day, right? So maybe it's just instructions about the man that's about to fall, or maybe it's more general, right? Are they going to follow my laws? Are they going to follow in my way? Are they going to listen to what I tell them? This might be a test case to see if they're prepared and ready to get any more mitzvot that will come following. Okay, but again, hayelech b'torati, not a literal sense of walking, right, one foot in front of the other, but more in a legal, in a legal sense of will they follow the laws, the rules or not. And then one more, a couple more. When Yitro comes and he sees Moshe sitting and judging the people, so we know that story, right? We know what happens with Yitro and Moshe. So Yitro asks him, "What are you doing?" And Moshe says, "Ki avo elai ha'am lidrosh Elokim." They come to seek out God from me, and if they have any difficulty, they come, and I have to adjudicate for them. And Yitro says, picking up in verse number 17, Vayomer chotein Moshe elav, lo tov hadavar asher ata oseh. So Moshe's father-in-law says to him, what you're doing is not good. Navolti bo gam ata gam ha'amazeh asher imach, ki chavei mimcha davar lo tufal aseh levadecha. You'll get overwhelmed and overburdened or confused, you and the nation, because it's too great a burden for you to do by yourself. Listen, and I'll tell you what you should do. You'll be the intermediary between the nation and God. And you shall warn them about the laws and the instructions that they should follow, and inform them about the path that they should go on and the actions that they should do. And so again, he's taking following the rules or doing God's instructions as a path on which one walks, right? Lalechet, to go, the same exact shorish, the same verb.
Yeah, and I saw that's bold. That's bolded.
Two more in Vayikra. Right, this is the introduction. I think we looked at this a few weeks ago. This is the introduction to the Arayot, the section just detailing the forbidden sexual relations. Mm-hmm. So source number 11, speak to the children of Israel and say to them, I am the Lord your God. So you shall not do the ways of the Egyptians from whence you came, nor shall you do what they do and what the Canaanites do where you're going to. Uvichukotehem lo telechu, do not go in their ways or in their laws. So here it's in the negative. It's not only in the sense of God's laws or God's rules that we could be holech, but one could also be holech, one can walk, one can go for any legal system, for any way of living, even the ones that we don't want to emulate. So we can do it. It works in the negative as well. And again, in a little bit later in Vayikra, chapter 20, ושמרתם את כל חוקותיי ואת משפטיי ועשיתם אותם ולא תקיא הארץ אתכם אשר אני מביא אתכם שמה לשבת בה. You shall keep all my laws and my statutes, and the land will not vomit you, which I'm bringing you to dwell in it. Lo telchu bechukot hagoy asher ani mishaleach mipneichem. Do not go in the ways of the other nations that I'm driving out before you, because they did all these bad things, and I abhorred, or literally, I abhorred them. Okay, so we've set the groundwork. Okay, I don't think there's any major questions, I don't think there's any chiddushim at this point. But the idea of following laws of a legal system being associated with this verb lalechet, to go, to walk, is something which features prominently. Are there any questions or comments at this point?
One, isn't the God, the Canaanite god who required child sacrifice called Molech?
There was a god Molech. Was that the Canaanite? I'm not sure if it was the Canaanite god, but there certainly was. That was the god associated with child sacrifice.
Right.
So I'm not sure if Molech is, it's certainly connected, but I don't know if it's halach, if it's the same exact shorish, or if it's mem. But yeah, interesting.
It's
Right.
Malach, I think is. Yeah, not Malach.
Right. So there is an idea that in Hebrew, we think of a shorish as being 3 letters, but really it's 2 letters, and then the third letter kind of gives some nuance. I'm going to blank on all the examples I have of this.
No, I don't think that's it.
And then we'll stick with it, right? Like lech, to go. So halach is to walk, and then melech would be a king because you follow in the way of the king, right? So it's not. But anyway, there might be a connection. That's interesting. I hadn't thought of that.
Interesting that Moshe would listen to his father-in-law when he told him.
Yes.
I mean, how many men listen to their father-in-law? They would say, "I've got this,"
Yeah.
It just doesn't elaborate. It just says he listened to him, and
I think I once spoke about that while my father-in-law was visiting. That was that was an interesting trash.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
There
He
are-
came
but-
back, so I guess I did okay.
But Yitro was also kind of a sheikh in his own community too.
No, for sure.
And he had also been at the court, and so what Paro did, as Moshe also was.
Yeah.
So it's not like he had absolutely no experience and he's talking off the top of his head. He was literally a leader of his tribe also, so he knew how things were done. So maybe that was part of it. Plus, Moshe was so modest that he never came across as, no, never mind, I got this, I know what's right, you don't, unless God told him stuff.
Yeah.
So maybe that's
Yeah.
part.
Okay. So
Arthur, excuse me, just a moment. It seems like there are 2 different ways that you're talking though about things. In one case, it opens up the possibility of walking in ways as an imitation of a model.
okay. And I think she froze up. Okay, so we have one way, imitation in a model, and now we're in suspense to hear her second point. Anne, are you there? Hello?
Sorry,
Okay, we lost you.
we lost you. Yeah.
Okay, so we heard one way is imitation like a model.
Like of a model of
Yeah.
somebody else is there. And that might work also for this reference to the Canaanite nations. You're going to see them and you're going to try to imitate them.
Mm-hmm.
Not, it doesn't really, but you also are trying to get to a system of law, but actually you've got two, in a sense, quite different concepts being thrown together with all of these passages. So I just wanted to.
Oh, so that okay, good. Thank you. So there's two ways, two reasons why we might follow in a law or do something, right? Number one is because we're trying to emulate those around us or those who came before us. And number two is because it's kind of the correct thing to do, right? And so that's interesting to think about this as well, and which model is being is our parsha describing. Okay, so that was step number one, just kind of laying the groundwork of seeing use of the verb halacha or halach in kind of this legalistic, non-literal sense. Step number two is to go back to Breshit and look at the ultimate walker, the ultimate walking figure, which is Avraham. Okay, so I think some of these psukim and passages will be familiar to us. Some of them we maybe they weren't on the top of our head. But certainly when we think of Avraham, the first thing that comes to mind is the very first time that Hashem appears to Avraham, or Avram at that point. Vayomer Hashem el Avram, lech lecha me'artzecha mimoladecha mibeit avicha el aretz asher areka. God appears to Avram and he says to him, go from your land, from your birthplace, from your father's home to the land that I will show you. Ve'escha legoy gadol. I'll make you a great nation. Ve'avarcha. I will bless you. V'agadla shemecha ve'yeh bracha. I will make your name great. You will be a blessing. V'avarcha mivarechecha mikalelcha al or. Nivachu b'cha kol mishpachot adama. And those who bless you will be blessed, and those who curse you will be cursed. And all the families, all the people of the land will be blessed because of you. So Avraham is told at the very beginning of his life, of his religious life, of his relationship with Hashem, lech lecha, go for you. And I think we've in different times spoken about different understandings of lech lecha, but here we're just concerned that the verb is what's used for his beginning of his career. A little bit later, right before his name is changed, Vayihi Avram ben Tishim Shana v'Teisha Shanim. Avram is now 99. Vayera Hashem el Avram. God appears to Avram. Vayomer elav ani el Shaddai. Hitalech lefanai v'heyeh tamid. I am El Shaddai. How exactly we translate that? We'll just leave it as I am God. Hitalech lefanai. Go before me and be tamim, blameless, innocent, perfect. It's not clear exactly what tamim means either. Again, so we have in the hitpa'el in the reflexive form, hitalech lifanai, go before me. It's not biti beinu veinecha v'arbeh otcha b'mod me'od. I will give my covenant between you and me, and I will make your sign, make you exceedingly numerous. Again, yeah.
Why can you say El Shaddai rather than saying Kel Shaddai when all other times...
We should say Kel Shakaya, right.
Oh, I'm not correcting you. It's one thing I never understood this.
No, I should have been consistent. I mean, in the context of learning, there really is no problem with saying God's real name, but I was not consistent, and you're correct. I'm saying Hashem and Elohim, I should say Kel Shakai.
And what, can you define Shaddai? Is that, it's a conflation of words.
Yeah, so if you get into the commentary, and I think in the Kabbalistic world, it's seen as a feminine trait of God, right? Shaddai related to breasts.
Asked and answered.
I think elsewhere it says Shadailo, right? That everything is sufficient for God, like Dayenu. So there's a lot to say about that word, about that name for God.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, so then again at the Akedah, when Hashem tells Avraham to go and take Yitzchak, he again says to him the same phrase that he began his career with, Lech lecha el eretz hamoriya v'aleu sham le'ola. go to the land of Moriah and bring him as an offering, as a sacrifice. To one of the mountains that I will say to you. And then, I think most interesting is later on. This is now in Parshat Chaye Sarah, when the servant, we assume is Eliezer, has gone to find a wife for Yitzchak. And he finds a wife. He finds Rivka, and he's now in Rivka's family's home, trying to convince them that she should go back with him in order to marry Yitzchak. So what does he say to them? Vayashbi'eni Adoni lemor, lo tikach isha livni bimnot haknani asher anochi yoshev ba'artzo. My master Avraham made me swear that do not take a wife for my son from the Canaanite women. Imlo el beit avi telech ve'al mishpachti v'lakachta isha livni. You should go to my family, to my father's home, and take a wife for him from there. Va'omar el Adoni. Ulai lo telecha isha acharai. So I said to him, well, what if she doesn't want to come with me? What if she doesn't want to leave her father's home? Vayomer Eli. So Avram says to me, Hashem, asher hitalachti lifanav, yishalach malacho itach, yitzliach darkecha v'lakachta isha livni mishpachati libeit avi. God, before whom I have walked, will send his angel with you and will make you successful.
Scroll down a bit.
Sorry. Thank you. He will send an angel before you and he will make you successful, and you will take a wife for my son from my family. Az tinakem alati, ki tavo el mishpachti, ve'im lo yitnu lecha v'yitanakim alati. And then, so that's when you'll be free of this oath that I'm making you take, either when she comes back with you, or if they refuse, at that point you're free. I'm not going to hold you responsible anymore. Right? So Avraham, in reflecting upon what his life was all about, and in sharing that with others, says, Hashem asher hitalachti lifanav. God before whom I walked. So not only, right, that's what Hashem tells Avraham to do, hitalech lifanai, and now Avraham confirms that that is in fact what he did. And now we can go back to our parsha, source 17. It's just again the first pasuk from Bechukotai. Im Bechukotai telechu, vet mitzvotai tishmeru vasitem otam. If you will go in my laws, you'll follow my laws and keep my commandments and do them and observe them. Okay, so we've already seen the prevalence of the verb halach when it comes to Abraham. But now look at this. The first time we're going to look is in the story of Sodom, when Hashem, right before Abraham begins negotiating on behalf of the people of Sodom with Hashem. Hashem Amar, Hamechasani me Avraham Asher Neoseh. God says, can I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do? Avraham Hayoyeh Legoy Gadol Vatzum V'nivuchubo Kol Goyei Haaretz. Avraham will be a great nation, mighty, strong, and all the other people will be blessed by him. Ki yedativ l'man asher yisaved banav et beito acharav. I know that he will command his descendants after him. Vishamru derech Hashem la'asot tzedakah u'mishpat. They will shamar, keep the way of God to do tzedakah u'mishpat. Okay, so again, Avraham, who's defined by halach, now says, what's he going to do? He's going to instruct his children, Vishamru derech Hashem la'asot. Echoing back to our pasuk, Umitzvatai tishmeru va'asitem otam. We have it again with Yitzchak. When Yitzchak encounters famine for the first time, and he wants to go down to Egypt just like Avraham did, Hashem says, don't go to Egypt, go to Gerar instead. And God says, I will fulfill with you the covenant, the promise that I made to Avraham. In verse number 5, Ekev asher shama Avram b'koli, because Avraham hearkened to my voice, vayishmor mishmarti mitzvotai chukotai v'torotai, and he kept my mishmar, that which has to be guarded, my commandments, my laws, and my statutes, and my teachings. Again, echoing back to
Yeah, we're not.
in the context of Avraham. Okay, so this is the case he wants to make, is that this introduction in Parshat Bechukotai that precedes the Tochacha should be pointing us back to Avraham. Is anyone at this point convinced, or it's a nice little thing, but it's not so we could find it, we could find many connections.
There's a great richness to it, certainly.
Okay.
Very beautiful. I just wanted to ask, whose translation are you using?
Whose translation? I'm using whatever Safari I have. I believe it's the JPS translation.
Okay, because in Bereshit source 16, it doesn't say whose ways I have followed. It says Asher Hitlah Halachti. It doesn't have a noun there at all. I just was wondering.
Vayomer
You
Eli.
had translated it yourself, and
No. Vayomer Eli. Avraham said to me. Sorry, let me show it to everyone else. Source number 16, right where it's bolded. Vayomer Eli. So this is the servant speaking. He, right? So Avraham said to me, to the servant, Hashem asher hitalachti lefanav. God before whom I walked.
Yeah, you said it that way, but the translation that you printed says whose ways I have followed.
Well, it's because it has Hashem in the Hebrew. They don't even translate it.
Whose ways I have followed.
Hashem, whose ways I have followed.
Right, whose ways I have followed. Where's the word ways?
Oh,
saying
sorry.
there's
Okay.
a
Okay.
noun, and there is no noun there.
There is, okay.
And I thought if you had translated it yourself and you're trying to make a more halachic kind of argument, you would say whose ways I have followed. It doesn't say that. It says the one with whom
You're absolutely correct. Again, this is just cut and paste.
Yeah, okay. It's another hitlachti. That's
okay.
all I'm pointing out.
Okay, thanks.
And I just want to leave that option open because, the Rebbe translates advance, to advance in something.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's lost often when we say, oh, these are the ways I have to follow or something like that. That whole momentum idea, once it's made into a noun, can change the whole feeling of things. But in the last case, because there with Avraham Avinu, there is a whole list of things that he does. You have this feeling of an advancing from one category to another category to another category. I just didn't want to lose that feeling.
Okay. Good point. Thank you. Okay, so now we have a little table, a little chart on a source sheet, and this I think this is what this is all building to. So on the rightmost side, we have from our parsha Bechukotai. So it begins right. If you follow if you follow my laws and observe my commandments. So what's the first thing that will happen if we do what we're supposed to do? V'natati gishmechem b'itam, v'natzna ha'aretz yivula, v'etz hasadeh yitain piryo, v'yisig lachem dayish et batzir, v'asir yatzig et zara, v'achaltem lachmechem lasoba, v'shavtem lavetach b'artzachem. I'll give you rain in their season, so that the earth will yield its produce, and the trees of the field their fruit. Your threshing shall overtake the vintage. Your vintage, right? You'll have a promise of abundance of food. What's the first challenge Avraham faces after giving his command of go?
Famine in the land.
Famine. Okay. Vayhi ra'av ba'aretz. Vayered Avram Mitzrayim alagor sham ki chaved harav ba'aretz. There was a famine. He has to go down to Egypt. Okay. Number 2. after the promise of food in Parshat Bechukotai, we have the promise of security. V'natati shalom ba'aretz, u'shchavtem ve'ein macharid, v'hishbati chayara amina aretz, v'cherev lo tavor b'artzachem. I will give peace in the land. You'll dwell, and there won't be anyone to bother you. There will be no bad animals, and there will not be sword. V'daftem et oivechem, and you'll chase after your enemies, etc., etc. Avraham faces war, right? Vayavo hapalit vayagid la'Avram mivihu shochem be'elonei mamreh ha'emori achi eshkol v'achi aner v'hem ba'alei brit Avram. The palit, the fugitive, comes and tells Avram about the war that happened in Stom with where Lot was living. Avram was living in Elonei Mamre. Vayishma Avram kishma achiv. Vayarek et chanicha b'yulidei veito shmona asar u'shlosh meot vayirdof ad Dan. Avram hears that Lot was captured, and he gathers his people and he goes to war. Vayechaleki alehem laila huva avada v'yakim v'yerdefum ad chova ad mismola damesek, and he divides his camp and he goes to war and he wins, right? And significantly, vayar yerdefim, he chases them, he pursues them, exactly like the promise that Hashem makes to Bnei Israel. Right, that you'll chase after your enemies. After the promise of security, Hashem promises us progeny. Ufaniti aleichem v'ifreti etchem. Sorry. V'yarbeti etchem v'akimoti et briti itchem. I will look with favor upon you, make you fertile and multiply you. I will maintain my covenant with you. Of course, progeny is the great challenge of Abraham's life, right? So we're told at the very beginning, even before Hashem appears to him, Vaikach Avram v'Nachor lahem nashim, shemeshet Avram Sarai, v'shemeshet Nachor Milka, bat Haran avi Milka v'avi Yiska. Avram and his brother Nachor both take wives. Avram marries Sarai, and Nachor marries Milka. Batihi Sarai akara ein la valad. Sarai is barren; she's not able to have children. And then a bit later, of course, when Sarah sees that she's not able to have children, she tells Avram to marry Hagar, and until ultimately Yitzchak is born. But this is clearly one of the great challenges of Avram's life. And then finally, after God promises us progeny in Bechukotai, we read, "V'natati mishkani b'tochechem, v'lo tigal nafshi etchem." I will place my abode in your midst, or my sanctuary in your midst, and I will not abhor you. V'talachti b'tochechem, I will walk among you. I will be for you a God, and you will be for me a nation. That God will establish his dwelling place among us, clearly a reference to the Mishkan and later to the Beit HaMikdash. Where does this fit in with Avram's life? What does Avram do?
Again, the translation is really different than what it says in the text for verse 12. And to make your point, if you intend to share this further, I would strongly suggest that you change it. I mean, it says, "I will be ever present in your midst," is in fact a translation of the word halach.
Right, v'hitalachti b'tochechem.
Halachti.
Yeah.
And we have, it's beautiful. "I will be ever present in your midst" is a way of bringing out another whole nuance of the walking with Hashem. It implies the very special presence of Hashem as we do something that Hashem wants us to do. So it would be actually a way of making another very fine point, but it doesn't. The word halach is not obvious.
You're absolutely correct. It's
yeah, that's a problem with
thank
that
you.
translation.
Yeah.
Or an opportunity, as they say.
Yeah. I mean, I would say for the purpose here, the fact that they can't translate it, right? That it's clearly is not a proper translation, just sort of highlights the points. But you're right; they could have done a much better job. Whichever translation this is, I think it's the JPS. So where does the Mishkani fit in with Avram's life? Think about what Avram did his entire career. right? We know about the struggle for children. We know about the famine. We know about his interaction with the kings. But what does he do for most of his life?
He welcomes guests.
He welcomes guests, for sure.
He builds lots
He
of altars.
preaches the one God.
He appreciates the one God, and he makes the one God known to others, right? He goes and he builds altars to God, and he calls in God's name. He makes others aware of God. So just 3 instances of this. Vayera Hashem al Avram vayomer lezarachatin et aretz hazot vayiven sham mizbeach laHashem hanira ilav. At the very beginning, right after God tells him Lech Lecha, so God then appears again and tells him, I will give this land to you. And Avram builds an altar to God. Vayatek misham ahara mikedem leBeit El, vayit ohalo Beit El miyam va'ed mikedem, vayiven sham mizbeach laHashem, vayikra b'shem Hashem. And then he moves, he goes to the next place, he puts his tent up, he builds another altar, and he calls in the name of God. Chapter 13, Vayel Avraham Vayavo Vayeshav Elonim Amrei Asher Bechevron, Vayiven Sham Mizbeach LaHashem. He builds an altar to God in Hebron. Vayita Eshel Biver Sheva Vayikra Sham B'Shem Hashem El Olam. He plants an eshel, a tamarisk in Be'er Sheva, and he calls in the name of God. There's a fundamental difference between what Hashem describes in Bechukotai and what Avraham does. Avraham, in order to make God's presence felt, has to travel around Canaan, travel around the world, building altars and calling out in God's name. What's the promise to us? Is that if we do what God says, God will be in our midst. We don't have to travel anywhere. We don't have to build anything, right? God will be there. Okay? And the same is true with all these other things. The promise of Bechukotai is that if we do walk in Hashem's way, if we do follow what Hashem says, then all the challenges Avraham faced will not be our challenges. We won't have to worry about the same stuff Avraham had to worry about. We won't have to worry about famine. We won't have to worry about war. We won't have to worry about progeny. Right? Everything will be taken care of. We won't have to worry about making God awareness of God known. Right? God will make himself known. Right? We won't have to travel around doing that, but it will all come to us. And so the beginning, this introduction, what we'll call the bracha part of Parsha Bechukotai, before we get to the Tochacha, is really a promise that if we do what Hashem tells us to do, if we are mithalech, if we do following God's ways, if we're holech like Avraham was holech, then we will not face those same challenges. Everything will be taken care of for us. And that is, that I thought was a brilliant connection. Again, I think Rabbi Echelon said it nicer than I just said it. But I did want to end with one Sfat Emet. It's really giving voice to an idea that's found prominently in all Hasidus. This is not unique to the Sfat Emet. This is an idea in Hasidus. We're on source 20, and let me just scroll down. So the Sfat Emet is commenting on when the passage we saw where Avraham is about to negotiate, or right after he negotiates on behalf of the people of Sdom. So that episode ends. We've spoken about this previously. That Hashem says, okay, if I find 10 people, then I won't destroy the city. End of conversation, implying that there aren't even 10. And then it says Avraham goes back and he goes to sleep. And he wakes up the next morning and he comes to the place where he had been the day before. He looks out and he sees the pillar of smoke rising up from Sdom, and he knows that his prayers were not answered. Okay, so the Sfat Emet is commenting on that passage.
This is the government.
V'ita, Avram tikin tfilat shacharit, ti vayashkem el hamakom asher amad sham. So Avram, we know, established the morning prayer shacharit, as it says that he stood in the place where he had been. Perush hapashut, shemiyad v'hakitzo mishnato ba'lo el hamakom asher amad bo etmo. The simple meaning is, as soon as he woke up, he went directly to the same place where he had been the day before. Vizehu seder oved Hashem. This is what it means to be someone who worships God, who serves God. Hanikra mehalik. To be someone who worships God is to be a mehalik, literally a wanderer, a walker, someone who walks. Kimamar v'dibarta bam b'shach b'cha v'kumecha ki kol yemei adam hem hiluch echad. Right, it says in the Shema, right, v'dibarta bam, that you will speak about them b'shach b'cha v'kumecha, when you go to sleep and when you wake up, implying there is no interruption. You pick up the next day exactly where you left off the day before. Ki kol yemei adam hem hiluch echad. All of a person's life is one journey. Ve'alav ne'amar ba'bayamim, k'moshe katav b'tfila v'nashkim v'nimsa yechol levavenu. Okay, as it says, whatever, he gives some textual proofs. Shezeh siman la'avat ha'borei yitbarach, shemiyad b'hashkama kodem kol uvda yiskar me'aborei yitbarach. This is a sign that one truly loves God. That as soon as you wake up, the first thing you think about is Hashem. K'te'ita v'sefer yashar l'Rabbeinu Tam, Lachin Avram shu amud ha'ahava, k'moshe katav Avram al avi. So therefore, Avraham was the pillar of love for God, as it says, Avraham, my beloved. He'id alav hakatuv vayashkem el hamakom. Right, that he woke up and he goes exactly to the same place where he was. Al zeh amru shetikein tfilat shacharit, and this is the significance of shacharit. Shehiniach zeh hakoach lekol ish Yisrael. He gave the power to every Jewish person to be able to arouse the earliness in every day, i.e. to pick up and continue on the same path that you were on the day before. Okay, so the spiritual journey that the Sfat Emet and really all of Hasidus picks up on is to be a mehalik, right? Is to be a wanderer. To recognize that you're on this constant journey, and part of that is to pick up. But I think that we can sort of enrich that understanding by thinking about what it means that Avraham, not only was he a mahalik in the sense of how he woke up and davened on behalf of the people of stone, but his whole life was a life of hiluch. It was a life of walking, of going. And I think that that's perhaps why we use the phrase halacha to refer to the code that we follow. Because clearly, it's much richer and it's much more than just, I don't want to say just, but it's not only about following the rules and, dotting every I and crossing every T, but it's about this lifestyle. It's about, right, what it means to be on that path, to be following the hitalech, however we're translating that. And that's what's embodied by the commitment to a religious lifestyle. It's not just the specifics and the technicalities of observing every mitzvah, but to be part of that lifestyle. And that's why I titled the shiur the Halachic lifestyle, that it really is about what the journey is that we're on and what every step is and how we go about that. So that was the basic thought. I'm curious to hear if there's any reactions or questions to any of this.
There's one really beautiful interpretation of this I found this morning in the Orach Chaim. It's in regard to the passage that you just cited, verse 12. So I will be, let's see, the hit halachti betochachem. The Orach Chaim has two whole different interpretations of this whole section here. One of them has to do with the days to come, but the other one has to do with the present. And here, I just like to share a little bit of it because I thought it was so beautiful. Hashem then continues and says, "I will walk within you." Meaning to say that in addition to not rejecting them, he will even derive satisfaction from having his Shekhinah dwell in the innermost part of them, which is the realm of the neshama, which is their innermost essence. For the term, the hit halachti, implies a pleasant stroll.
Oh, nice.
So it isn't only that, as you are very nicely trying to encourage us to stroll through all of this, to go from one person to another, to go from one situation to another, to feel Hashem's presence, to do Hashem's will. But he's saying that Hashem this is the sharing of the really high levels, in Chassidus, of the sheer delight. What is the sheer delight of Shabbos? That Hashem can stroll among us and see what we are doing too. So I just wanted to add that.
Okay, thank you. That's a beautiful thought. Thank you. Judy? Yeah.
I think the fact that the verb is usually in the hitpalel form means that you have to make an effort. It's not simple. You have to really involve your whole self in some way.
Yeah, that's very nice. It's unusual to find it in the reflexive form, but in this context, it does appear many times. And I think that's very nice, right? That you have to really do the work.
Right.
Yeah, thank you. All right, anyone else? Are we ready to say Lila Tov for tonight?
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
All right.
thank
Okay, thank you, everyone. If you will be with us for Shavuos, there's a communal lunch happening the first day of Shavuos. Please, if you haven't signed up already and you plan to join us, let us know so we can be sure to get the proper order of food in for that. And I look forward to seeing everyone hopefully on Shabbos and again next Tuesday.
Great.
All right, Lila Tov. Bye.
Thank you.